Plastics are found all throughout the oceans, from the Arctic Ocean all the way down to the Marianas Trench. Plastics are also found within living organisms. Hello, friends. Jim here. So what does this all mean? We have, having plastics in our tissues. I've done videos before showing how this interferes with the functionings of a plant. I showed videos where larval fish were ingesting microplastics. Microplastics have been found in human blood. They get into tissues, causing problems with metabolic rates, can cause obesity, cancer, other cardiovascular diseases, and other chronic conditions. Well, here's an article that was published in the Alaska Beacon, and it discusses microplastics found in body tissues of walruses harvested by Alaska hunters. Discovery of tiny bits of plastic in the muscles, blubber, and livers of Pacific walruses adds to evidence of pollution spread through the world's oceans. And here's a picture of a walrus. This is taken in the Chukchi Sea. Research by University of Fairbanks, Alaska Fairbanks student found microplastics, mostly tiny fibers, were lodged in muscle tissue, blubber, and livers of walruses. Okay. So, we're finding this stuff. So, the findings by this UAF student, who, there he is right there, Tony Blade. That's the student who made the discovery, standing by a poster presentation. Okay? And he gave this talk at the Alaska Marine Science Symposium on 30 January 2024. And so we need to, see what this is all about. So his work adds to the increasing knowledge about the widespread presence of microplastics in the world's natural environment, even in what we call remote locations. It's a reflection of the plastic age we live in. It's ubiquitous, said Tony Blade. Microplastics are tiny pieces of plastic, usually smaller than 5 millimeters. Some are too small to be seen without microscopes. And then you also have the nanoplastics, which are on the order of microns in length. And those are even more insidious. Blake's project, conducted under the supervision of UAF marine biology professor Lara Horstman, examined body tissues of 5 walruses harvested by subsistence hunters. The samples were donated by hunters from Gamble and Savunga, Siberian Yupik villages on St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Strait region, and from Wainwright and Inupiat village on the Alaska mainland. Every one of the 15 samples, muscle, fat, and liver from each of the 5 walruses, held microplastics. Every one of them. In all, there were 73 microplastics isolated from the tissues, almost all of them fibers. In 4 of the walruses, muscle tissue had the highest concentration of microplastics, though in 1 walrus from Savunga, blubber had the highest concentration. Okay, so a couple of questions I have is, what was the size of these tissue samples? Say, 73 microplastics doesn't sound like a lot, but what was the size of the tissue samples? How many grams, how many kilograms, what have you? And then, what was you found these, what was the density? What was the distribution pattern? And from that, you can possibly extrapolate to how many microplastic fibers are throughout the individual walrus's body. So those are some questions that to me are raised. Find out what is, in essence, what is the concentration? How many grams per kilogram or milligrams per kilogram? So that's and obviously we would probably need to see his research to get an answer to those. So basically, these plastic bits are getting beyond the stomachs and the digestive tract and finding their way into the body tissues. It's a process that scientists call translocation. And it's not just walruses, it's other marine mammals and fish and so on. So, how are they getting through the biological barriers to get into other tissues is not understood. It's unknown now. I can almost see how it can end up in the liver. You've got the hepatic portal vein, so I can see how it gets into the liver because after the absorption is done in the small intestine, you have some shunting of material to the liver for further processing. That's possible. Is it? But how can it cross the various membranes is still a big question. So they're following up with this work. They're going to look to see if there's any age or sex-related patterns to the presence in the tissues. And why were walruses chosen? Well, they're culturally important to the indigenous people of the region. And also what walruses feed on. They feed on benthic organisms, clams, snails, other critters that you find in the benthic zone. And there's a difference between epibenthic and benthic. Benthic are organisms that are actually in the substrate. Epibenthic are organisms that are found on the substrate. And walruses like to dig up the clams and the snails and so on. So they go for the benthic organisms, and I'm sure they ingest some epibenthic organisms as well. So they're digging through ocean sediment. Prior studies have shown that microplastics in the Bering Strait region are settling into the sediments of that area, as well as being taken up by organisms like mussels, crustaceans, invertebrates that walruses are eating directly. So this is a case of trophic amplification, where if you have this has been demonstrated, for example, like in PCBs and so on. You have a concentration, and as organisms ingest that, as that goes up to trophic levels, the concentration increases. And again, it's called trophic amplification, and so on. The idea that walruses are more at risk for plastic consumption because of their benthic eating habits is consistent with recent findings by another UAF researcher who focused on microplastic ingested by spotted seals in the Bering Strait region. Alexandria Sletton, whose project was the thesis for a newly acquired master's, presented her findings at the symposium's poster session in a follow-up to a presentation last year. Of the 33 seal stomachs she examined, 32 had plastic. Those seals that fed more heavily at the benthic level, where walruses eat, had more plastics in their stomachs than the seals that fed on prey at the nearer to surface area, basically in the pelagic region. Pelagic is open water. Blade's walrus findings also fit in with other findings, for example, by Duke University researcher Greg Merrill, who recently documented the presence of microplastics in body tissues of a variety of marine mammals. Merrill, in a presentation at the symposium, describes his findings from tissues from 22 marine mammals of 12 species. And he tested bottleneck dolphins and whales found dead after strandings in North Carolina and California to mammals harvested by subsistence hunters or found stranded in Alaska. Bearded, spotted, ringed seals, beluga, gray, minke, fin whales. 2/3 of the animals tested had microplastics, mostly fibers. and at least one type of body tissue, according to Merrill's study. Translocation is occurring. Plastic that is ingested, those microplastic particles are moving around in the body and depositing in different tissues, said Merrill. The marine mammals are consuming plastics indirectly, eating prey that acquired the microplastics at lower levels in the food web. But even if the consumption is indirect, the quantities can be staggering. Large filter-feeding baleen whales are taking in up to 10 million plastic particles a day. Think about that. And as he says, that's a rather staggering number. While most can be expelled out in the feces, some are passing through the various body parts. Merrill was able to find microplastics in preserved samples dating back to 2001, indicating that microplastics have been finding their way into marine mammal bodies for decades. It's a process that's been happening for some time, likely since plastic has been ending up in the environment dating back to post-World War II. So, and of course, what happens is the animals ingest these fibers. Well, it will mess up with various physiological processes. Plain and simple. So we got the, biological amplification, biological concentration, and this is really not very good because if humans are hunting these animals, and they do, very likely that humans are ingesting the microplastics as well. Because the indigenous folks there, they don't waste anything of the animals they harvest. It's already been documented that there's a high level of PCBs in the indigenous population in the Arctic. So it's further pollution issues they need to be concerned about. This is a big problem. Plastics in the environment, plastics in our bodies, plastics in the food chain. This is a big problem. And plastics don't really go away. It's not like they can break down into the constituent atoms. They just get smaller and smaller, but they're still like basically a functioning unit. So, more problems. Now, I wanted to bring this to you. Thank you for your time.